founder and CEO of Common Farms. Thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we've had challenges scheduling things, obviously because of the time zone, but I appreciate you being flexible. I'm sure that happens a lot when you're trying to connect with people.
Yeah, I think the hardest is North America time and Hong Kong, Asia time. But I'm an early bird, so it's 6 a.m. here in Hong Kong, and that works fine for me
Okay.
as
And just to set some context for the viewers and listeners, it's 4 p.m. where I'm at right now. So you're in the future right now.
well. Yeah. Where about are you right now?
I'm in Minnesota in the Midwest, so we're an hour behind Eastern Standard Time. But it's something I'm still getting used to because I grew up in New York and I've lived in California. So
Mhm.
I'm more used to city life. So
Yeah,
life circumstances brought me here. So it takes some getting used to. Especially,
yeah, and another time zone as well.
yeah. So heard you speak. It was the Indoor Tech Conference. A lot of it start to sound that similar. So there's Con, obviously, which is coming up with Vegas, Indec, and I believe Chicago. And it's hard to keep up with everyone that's doing interesting stuff in the space. And so that's why that conference is helpful to see what's happening on a global perspective. And so it was exciting to hear a little bit of your story, but I knew that little bit that you covered on stage was not the whole picture. And I definitely love long form conversations, and I'm excited to come in and share your full story here. But just regarding the conference, was that your first time at Indoor Ag Tech, and what was the overall conference experience for you like?
Yeah, that was my first time. So I really started Common Farms probably right at the cusp of COVID. So I got some fundraising to start the proof of concept end of 2019. I started building the shelves myself then. And then 2020, Q1, that was when COVID started. And I did start selling produce here and there prior to that. But, to get right down to it, that was when I started. And, Hong Kong and China had the first, cases. So, everything was panic mode. And I was just looking at my half built 1,600 square foot farm. I was like, what am I going to do now? Because I was planning to target the restaurants, and the restaurants that or the chefs we started working with, they're like, "Yeah, we might have to pause. We don't know when we're coming back to order. We don't even know." And reality is like we didn't know where this was going. And so I didn't leave Hong Kong for 3 years straight, building common farms. Hong Kong didn't have as stringent of lockdowns as some places around the world, but every time you come in and out of Hong Kong, it would be anything from 7 to 21 days. So that wasn't an option when, you just start a business. So I just never left Hong Kong. And so going to Chicago earlier in June this year, that was my first time going abroad outside of Asia for any kind of conference or, any kind of interaction in this industry. So, I thought it was a good time to just get on the ground and see what's happening in North America. And, I listen to podcasts, I watch interviews from afar. And so it's very different when you go there and just actually get to talk to people behind the scene and, having the side conversations. So it was great insight for me and how different it is over there and in Asia and how we have to build things differently as well.
Talk about setting the stage for seeing just how resilient you are as a business owner, starting a business just before COVID. But I mean, actually started the podcast in early 2020 because I was excited to see what was happening in the industry. And just as I was starting those first conversations, like the lockdowns were happening, and I thought for a second, like, no one's going to be in the mood to talk. But thankfully, I kicked it off with David Farquhar of IGS, and we had a great conversation and sort of set the stage for what was to come. But it highlighted, importantly, some of the exact things that everyone in this industry is concerned about: food security, supply chain issues, access to hyperlocal food. And it's sort of brought to the front and almost in a way that would not have maybe seemed as important had we not been all going through the same thing at the same time. And so I'm curious, like, as you're going through this, really tough way to start a business, but like, how do you find the strength to go through? Did you have a support group? And I'm just curious because it's a challenging time, not only for a business owner, but someone who's starting something brand new, a new initiative like this, I'm curious if you can remember back what that time was like for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I think with a lot of people, and it might be a psychological human thing, once you pass the hard times, you generally don't remember precisely how you got it done. But it's usually people who's like, "Oh, do you remember this time? Like, do you remember like you did this?" And so actually earlier this week, one of our early interns came in and, came to our new farm and, just to catch up because he was in town and he was going to do a short internship and he was studying in Toronto at that time in biology. And so because of COVID, so everything went online. And so he ended up staying put in Hong Kong. He was just supposed to be a few months intern and it turned into a full year. And, he was there during the pretty hard days of, just trying to figure out what the business is going to be. There was only a few key elements that I knew. Hong Kong didn't have agriculture industry. We're importing 99% of the food we consume here. Quality is very different when from the time you harvest and the time you consume, especially when food has transported for so long, especially for fresh produce. And we have a decent amount of customers locally who are willing to pay high prices for high quality. That was basically all I knew. And I thought this was a good enough opportunity to just give it a shot. And so this intern of ours, he was just reminding me, like, just did you know, I don't know if you remember, but like, you know, because he saw our farm now, our farm is now 10,000 square feet. And he was like, "I don't know if you remember, but, like, almost nothing really grew properly in our farm, like, it was never consistent. We have something called the bronze fennel, now we have, like, a full row of them, and it's very lush in our farm now." But he was like, "I remember we had, like, literally 2 pieces that you told me to still harvest for one of your customers." So, he reminded me, and now I got, like, flashbacks. I'm like, "Oh, yeah," like, there were weeks where you know, I was right before I got into the farm, I'm just hoping that there's no flooding from our irrigation system and didn't have to mop up the floor. I mean, there were just a lot of these things. And I think at that time, it was partly stubbornness and just wanting to prove myself. And I thought the mission I had for myself, which was not very well articulated at that time, it was just inside of me. I thought that was meaningful enough for me to keep going. And I just wanted to put everything I got, all my energy, effort into one thing that was meaningful enough for me and just give myself the best shot to make it happen. And then it was just going through day by day and then you just become a machine and it's just get the orders out, harvest this, harvest that, and I think COVID in hindsight has been the silver lining where there just wasn't much else to do other than just stay focused and work. So
That's such an interesting story because everyone has a different experience. And you mentioned a word there, this idea of being stubborn. Is that something like if I were to talk to your parents, is that a trait that you've always exhibited as a child or growing up, this ability to like persevere or just maybe even just being stubborn, just you got to keep going until you figure something out?
I think if it's in the things that I really believe in and am passionate about, yeah, like nothing's stopping me. And then obviously you have a good group of support network, but at the end of the day, it's your business, you're in full responsibility. So, you're lying in bed at night and, you're running through things and it could get lonely. And but partly is my team, it was just one person or it was half a person because they're just part-time. And, my responsibility to that person would drive me, my responsibility to the customers. But very early days, the customers were a huge driver to why I just kept going. They were just extremely supportive. I knew it was very inconvenient to order from us in the early days. We had very specific times for delivery. We had limited products, limited quantities. It made no rational sense for any of the customers to buy from us, but they did. And they order from us every single week consistently. And that helped us grow. That helped me grow. That helped us get better. And that drove the business.
So let's rewind the clock back a little bit because I'm curious. The great thing about this industry is that everyone's coming at it from a different perspective, from a different background, and Maybe now, but I think, years ago, there weren't university programs in vertical farming, so
Yeah.
everyone's sort of learning as they go. So, like, walk us through, like, the origin story of common farms and how you came up with the concept, and then maybe even, like, what you were working on before and as everything led to, putting this idea together.
Yeah, sure. So, right before I started Common Farms, I was in the restaurant industry. I was working with an Italian chef here in Hong Kong. I helped him grow from one restaurant to seven different businesses within 1.5 years. And that ranged from high end restaurant to casual dining to retail and wholesale distribution. So, because we did that, I got access into the behind the scene of the food system. So, we were traveling to Italy probably about 4 times a year. We would fly into Milan, drive all the way down to Puglia, and then we would be hitting all the producers. So producers, everything from wine, cheese, caviar, tomatoes, salad greens. And I grew up in Hong Kong and Shanghai. So I never had any experience of growing produce or a backyard garden, even just growing herbs. So all of this was
Yeah.
very new to me and understanding seasonality. I didn't realize, so I was 24 at that time. I didn't understand food seasonality. I didn't understand tomatoes were grown during the summertime in Italy during this certain period. So it was mind blowing. And then I love talking to the farmers. It was just so real and raw. Like there is no BS when you talk to them because there's no time for BS. So
Yeah.
it was during then that I started to understand more about the food system and what food quality means. And on weekends, I would be working in the kitchen because I wanted to learn about the operations. So I'll be doing a lot of the mise en place. So doing a lot of the food prep, and that's when I start receiving all the produce that I would be ordering. And, you know, right off the bat, you open the bag, 10% of arugula you have to throw in the trash because they
Mm.
spoil
Yeah.
during transport. And then throughout the week, more and more you have to throw out. And because I was working more on the back end operations, so I knew how much everything was. So I'm like, that's another dollar, another dollar, another. Holy shit. And that is $100 right there, just, thrown out. And on top of that, I knew the cost of transporting. And so having all of this, it was just numbers running through my head. And I just thought there's got to be a better way to do this or a better way of transporting, sourcing, whatever it could be. There has to be something a little bit better than this. And my family was in manufacturing. So I also understood how intensive product or production any kind of manufacturing is, and I didn't want to get into that space. So I was pretty reluctant, like I'm not going to go into food production, I'm not going to go in like real agriculture. But when you distill to the core of it, I had to get to the production because if we want to change anything in the food system, we have to own part of that source of production. We had to be the ones responsible to make the decisions of the inputs. So where the soil's coming from, the formulation of the soil, what kind of water are we using, the seed that we're getting from, who's the supplier that we're getting from, where are they getting from, is it organic, is it not organic, the packaging of the produce, are we going to harvest it, not harvest it, what are the product mixes. So all these like minuscule decisions actually really matter to the experience, to the products for the customers. So I had to get into production. Then it was figuring out how to grow anything. What should I grow? Where should I grow? What's the system to use? And because of Hong Kong, notoriously expensive for space, scarce of space. So, there are some YouTube videos and there's some information about indoor farming, vertical farming. And so that was the route that I ended up taking. But yeah, learning about a lot of it, to be honest, it really started on YouTube, and then it was watch this and then try and do it right away. We had a couple of chefs as our customers initially, and they would send a laundry list of, oh, do you have this crop? Do you have the lemon thyme? Do you have the cornflower? And I had no idea what most of these things were. So just Google search it, and I'm like, yes, I do. And then look for a seed supplier, order that, and then just try and grow it. So that was really the start.
Wow, what a story. And just that sort of like figuring things out. I think the analogy that people like to use is building the plane on the way up. It's like, because, the fact that you're going to YouTube to get a lot of this information is helpful. But it's almost like on demand learning. And I think the fact that you're resourceful enough to know that it's better, you don't want to say no, because the minute you start saying no to one or two of the crops or the produce, they'll be like, well, then I can't rely on her. And so this idea of just saying yes, and then I'll figure out how to do it, really was a quick experience for you. Also to figure out and understand the market, because I think a lot of the challenges farmers have in this space is maybe they're good growers, but they're not good business people or to build the relationships. And it sounds like that was an important strategy. Obviously, Hong Kong, lots of high-end restaurants. I'm sure that was part of what helped this model as well. But can you talk a little bit about the importance of building those relationships? Because you said you started to have these conversations with these chefs. And I think you understood probably from working in a restaurant yourself how important it was to connect with those decision makers.
Yeah, so in such a high density city, competition is high. So our competitors are not the local producers or other farms in Hong Kong. It's the importers. So what that means is we have the rest of the world who are producing fresh greens. And we ended up focusing on microgreens because of the short production cycles, the amount of space that's needed is much smaller. We don't have the luxury of a backyard in Hong Kong. We barely even have the luxury of a balcony. So every corner, every dollar, every cent counts here. And in Hong Kong, businesses cycles very quickly. So you can see a restaurant that opened for 9 months or within a year, and then they close, a new one would come by. And this is pretty common in Hong Kong because it's just a very competitive market. And so just within the environment that I'm in, I just knew if we're going to do something, we have to be thinking of it as a business. So even though I am dibble dabbling with the growing side, I need to be thinking about the market side very early on. And because it's great if we can grow something, but if no market wants it, no one's going to buy it at the price you want to sell it at, it's almost irrelevant what you can grow, develop, and produce. So microgreens is not specialty greens and edible flowers is not something that most people know about. Even chefs, like a lot of them don't have a full understanding of it, especially local chefs, because we just never had the opportunity to learn about it. And so it required a lot of education for myself as well. So it was finding the right target customer. And so the way we've been doing it was always finding that customer, knowing exactly what they want and being able to give them what they want and then develop the product together with them. That way we know whatever we grew, we had a customer that we're growing for. So there's a real purpose for it versus just growing the produce and then hoping for the best that someone's going to buy it. So we were very methodical about that. But then again, we had to test the market. Do people want microgreens? What microgreens do they want? How do they want them? What's the crop diversity? How much diversity do we need? What's the price point? And then also, do people believe growing locally is going to be a more premium product compared to the imports? Because Hong Kong was so strongly on supplied from outside. Premium products are coming from Japan, Europe. So if we're growing locally, are they going to be paying more? Would they be willing to pay the premium? There were a lot of these questions we had to figure out. And it was not for us to answer them. It was for us to do something, execute, and then find out the answer from the market. And so that takes time and that takes a lot of incremental improvements and consistency to get there. And so we started small. Most people, my family, friends, they're like, I don't know why you're doing this. I'm not sure where this is going. This is probably one of the hardest, you chose the hardest industry to do in Hong Kong. But I just thought from a customer perspective, if we could grow produce locally and I can get it directly from the source, from a trusted source with people that grow, that care about the produce and the process, I'm going to feel really great as a customer. And that's the supplier and that's the producer I want to be buying from. And so I created this scenario and this, I guess, the character and that future of the business. And that was the mission, that was the goal for me.
That's so inspiring because I think to your point, you have to wear so many hats, right? And you talk about, you could be growing the most delicious produce there is, that tastes wonderfully and that everyone loves. But if you haven't thought about the market and you haven't built those relationships, and so it feels like you're constantly switching hats because you do have to grow something that's delicious and that people
Mhm.
want and that tastes good. But you're immediately thinking of like, where am I going to sell this? Who's going to buy this? And, it's important to build those relationships because it sounds like there was a bit of like, trial and error. You'd probably provide some produce to a chef and they'd give you feedback on what they
Yeah.
liked, what they did, and so you're constantly reiterating. So when it comes to thinking about how you were going to set this up, you mentioned that you did start small. So maybe can you talk a little bit about where you started and how you started to grow and, if you made the decision to build in-house or just find partners for where you're at now?
Yeah. So because I didn't have an extra room at home and I didn't have a backyard or in the office. So I had to look at my bank account, look at how much savings I had, and then go and rent a space. So we started off in a 200 square foot space. I was working with some of my elementary school classmates just to start it up. And that was when we start looking at, okay, what's the system we need to use? What are we growing? So we rented out a 200 square foot space, extremely small, extremely expensive. It was about 1,000 US dollars a month in rent.
Wow.
Right off
Wow.
the bat, like, no room for error, but growing and learning about plants and, having no experience, had to have room for errors because we were trial and erroring. And so, right off the bat, we had that cost, but we needed a space, and I think part of it, when you have that pressure, it makes you move faster, it makes you certain decisions quicker. So we started off there. We got a space out in an outer island in Hong Kong. So what that means is we had to ferry into the mainland, which is where most of the restaurants are. And so early days, it was getting friends, doing deliveries myself, harvesting, doing invoicing, just doing the whole 9 yard and more. And it's not easy and it absolutely makes no rational sense to have done any of it. But we had to do it to start building the business model because there wasn't a business model like what we were thinking. And I didn't want to do a plug in the system where we produce and then just sell to retailers because I saw other farms that have failed that did that, especially growing in Hong Kong because the retailers take too much of a margin. They basically own your business and you don't get a say. You don't get to price set your products. You don't get to decide what to grow. And we didn't want to be in that position. The great thing about starting from scratch is you get to make the calls because you're pretty much irrelevant. No one really needs you. You get
Yeah.
to fly under the radar and just build and create whatever you want. And then you just test it and then see if it works. So we were irrelevant to everyone. And but we literally went customer by customer and it was all through word of mouth. A chef worked in this restaurant, he worked with our produce, he loved it. He went to the next restaurant and then he brought us over to the next restaurant and we became the producer and supplier for them. So that was the early days. And the other thing is, well, how big do we want to grow this? How big could we grow this? And what are the crop types we're going to grow? And why should we grow them as well? And how are we going to be different? What's our mode? It's just constantly questions that I didn't have answers for. And the only way to answer them realistically and honestly was just doing the work and, executing and then getting the market feedback. So, microgreens, specialty greens was the route that we chose to go by because we had to differentiate. And since our competitors are importers, there's no way they could compete with us on the quality, especially when we are growing locally and we have the speed to customer as well. So there were all these little elements that were really important that created the right product and the right business model for us. And then I wasn't too concerned about how big we want to be, but definitely we wanted to scale because when you're in agriculture, scaling is part of the success. And so we just had to figure out along the way. And we knew education was part of it. We knew education was going to cost. So we had to think of ways where we could be creative and manage costs much better without overspending because we're just a startup. We just don't have that amount of resources to expense.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what the market is like there. You have made reference to some folks that maybe tried this model earlier. And I'm also curious about, you touched upon education. So what is the market like or the people's experience like indoor farming in Hong Kong? What's the history of it there? Obviously there's people that have tried it but have not succeeded. And obviously it sounds like you were learning from some of those lessons as well. But there's also an education process because as with all things, even myself, as I got into this industry, I start to pay more attention now when I'm in the supermarket. I'm turning over the clamshells and I no longer buy leafy greens from California, like we have a
Yeah,
greenhouse grower here in Minnesota, and I'm conscious of it. It's obviously fresher, it lasts longer, all that sort of stuff. But it was an education process for me. So I'm curious, if, how much of it was you having to educate both your partners and your customer and the
sure.
opportunities was.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk about the market side first, and then I can talk about the back end technical side on how like we set up the farm. So on the front end, the great thing is I have to give credits to our customers. They are the high end restaurants. So they do have that prestige. And because we supply to them, then we can leverage on that. Oh, we supply to the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, or we supply to the Grand Hyatt, or we supply to the Rosewood Hotel. And then that gave us leverage to go talk to the next customer and even just in the broader community base. And we were very targeted for the chef community because that was what I knew. And I knew where the problems were. And I was able to be very focused on them. And I was able to service them very specifically versus a one size fits all. So I really wanted that target niche market and be able to win in that space first. And so, because a lot of these chefs have been, a lot of them are Europeans or have worked in the US. So they do have a good base knowledge of what these ingredients are. And so, in a way, they start educating me about, the crop diversities, what they've used, how they've used it, and, what else they're looking for. So that was the first part. And then in terms of the education, then what we had to do was open up our farm to have people come in for the visit and experience it firsthand. And so it was very critical to do it inside Hong Kong and the proximity to where people are, the convenience of transport was really important. So the locations that we choose is methodical, and I'm able to say you are 20 minutes or 15 minutes away from work, from your restaurant. And that gets them into the farm. And then that's when I can show them and share with them and show them the plants and the crop diversities, how we grow them, what we've built. And then they just get very excited. They're coming up with recipes. And now at times we're working on the menus with the chefs, or they're coming into the farm and then they're figuring out what that next season menu looks like or what the pairing is going to be like. And so we start working with the European chefs mostly. And then now we've been working more with Chinese and local chefs because now they start to incorporate it into their dishes. So we have one chef that's like, hey, I'm doing this deep fried scallop. Here's the plate. Give me some options. What should I pair with for the flavor? So there's the flavor profile, there's a visual profile. And then on top of that, we have to think about the shelf life for them and then what they're pairing it with, what kind of cuisine, and then what stories the marketing team can tell or what they can write on the menu. There's a lot of these things that's an add on to the product. It's no longer just selling greens, a piece of leaf or a flower. It's the whole experience that they get from it. So that's been the experience on the chef side. But because we started selling, microgreens, there's that nutritional element in what we grow. And so we started getting customers calling us, "Hey, can I buy it? Do you deliver to homes?" And we started putting some of our produce online
Mm,
during COVID because I went
yeah.
into the panic mode and I was like, "We're just gonna try and sell online." But we started having people calling us and say, "Hey, I read this article. I read this study that micro broccoli has anti-cancer biocompounds in it. I like to buy it for my mom." Or someone that is very sensitive to chemical pesticides and chemical fertilizers, and they need our produce because ours are free from that. So then we started getting educated by these customers. Oh, okay. Micro broccoli has all of these benefits. Oh, yeah, great. Okay, actually, people are reading these articles, or oh, they're actually considering pesticide free, organic, and then we got educated by these customers. So we go and dig into more of these information and then we try to amplify it. So, yeah, that's the gist of it on the market side, on the education. And then the decision making on the system and how to build it, because I worked in a factory, in a manufacturing plant before. One thing I knew was things break. And when they break, and especially when it's a
Yeah.
biological product, you don't have that much time, especially indoors, climate control. You don't have that much time to wait for a part to come and then try and fix it. You got to get that done in the next few hours. So I was very adamant
Yeah.
that our system has to be simple. I'm not an engineer, so I need to be able to fix it. I need to be able to run down to the hardware store, grab something, and be able to get this thing running again, or be able to call someone up within the next hour. And this is going to be someone that never worked on our system before, and he's able to fix it. So we buy very simple systems. We source, we don't develop the hardware because there's enough of it in the market. And I don't think I can add much more value what's already in the market. And so I'm not going to compete in a game that I don't think I'm going to win in. And so we keep it very simple, and it's a no-brainer to fix things, to buy a part. It's going to be affordable enough to do it. And so that's kind of how we stuck
Yeah.
to it. So, and that's since, the very beginning to now, where we've obviously upgraded the system, but every part is pretty simple. We can get parts locally, fix it. There's no customized parts in what we do other than the customization of putting it all together. But in terms of hardwares,
Sure.
we don't customize those.
I think what's fascinating is how much you've figured out where the lane to operate in that leans into your expertise around, because you have the family background in manufacturing, you've got the restaurant experience as well. And as you were talking about having these conversations with these chefs, the fact that they're asking you for your ideas or your suggestions about what to grow or what would pair well, because they know that you have that experience, I feel like it really adds like a whole nother layer to the relationship you're building with your clients, because it's something that maybe some other, you know, farmers or other farms may not have. They don't have that experience and they haven't, maybe they're just been growing, but not understanding how chefs think and how they really value planning ahead and really making all these combinations work and what they're doing. Because having I worked at in a restaurant years ago as a waiter, but it was a pretty nice restaurant. But you can tell like they're about presentation and they're about like the experience for the customer and what that's going to look like. And so they're already thinking ahead to the
Mhm.
moment that they lay that plate down, like in front of that diner. And it's interesting to have that for you to have that experience so you can you know, facilitate those conversations and to really because you're thinking that as well because you know that your microgreens are what their diner is going to experience at the end of the day. And so I'm sure that's top of mind for you.
Yeah, we're thinking about customers and what that's gonna experience is like, and I'm tracking on their social media what gets photographed and, what that experience, and I think not just in, the food industry, not just in the culinary world, but in every industry now, it's just really about the experience, and we gotta keep up with it, and, things are moving quickly. People have options, so we gotta stay ahead and, not predict, but actually know what people want and be able to give it to them before they even know it. Like, that would be great. We don't always get it right, but that's why we always have to be in the market, talking to the chefs, understanding what they need, and trying to meet their needs and bringing value to them, not just in just the produce. I don't think, everyone can grow the leaves. Obviously, to the quality, to the expectations, that will be different, but everyone can. We get asked like, "Oh, so can I do this at home?" Like, "Yes, sure, you can definitely do this at home." I started at home, just with one pot and until, my pot of tomatoes got kicked out. But it's about that consistency, and then once you're able to give a good quality product, people have expectations. The expectations go higher. You can't go below what you delivered already. So we got to keep improving and we got to keep making changes, but these are small tweaks because once you grow the business a little bit, you can't, a few years ago, I could just change out the soil medium, the grow medium to a completely different supplier or a completely different mixture because the business is not that big to be relevant or to
Yeah,
have such a
yeah.
high risk. Now we just can't do that. So we have to make these we have to keep tuning it. And sometimes it's not easy because it takes a lot of patience and you might not have that time for that patience as well. So we're very much customer driven. So we basically pull in what the customer demands are, and then we basically have the production for it. And that's why we get to use indoor farming, vertical farming as a tool to be able to meet these customers' demands and be very precise in targeting these needs and meeting these needs. Whereas, you mentioned traditional farmers, they might just have the capacity to only focus on production because they have a lot to worry about. They have to think about the
Yeah.
weather, they have to think about if it's gonna rain, monsoon season, typhoon, in our case, in the subtropic in Hong Kong. They have to think about the pest problems, the runoffs from their neighbor. There's a lot they need to think about. There is no capacity to think about the market and, all these little details. So completely understand and that's why we had to think about doing it differently, but owning the market, owning the relationship with the customers, I think is key to growing the business, and vertical farming allows us to do that. And because we can do precision, then we can even look into the precision of growing for specific benefits of our target markets, like the nutritional value in microgreens.
I love that you said that you're supporting your customers. I think that's really fascinating concept, and this idea that you're looking at the social media to see what people are like resonating, what's sharing. It's just like really like kind of thinking several steps and kind of seeing what the market is asking for. I think that's a really fascinating and smart approach. So bring us to present day. Like, what does the team look like now? And then, what's on the roadmap for you?
Everyone is pretty much local, which is really great because we don't Hong Kong doesn't have an agriculture industry, so there is not a pool of farmers and growers we can hire from. So, when I first started hiring, it was literally passionate about food, interested in agriculture, willing to work potentially long hours, basically that. And so we have a great team of, everything from moms to retirees to patrons in the industry. And our head of ops was actually one of our early customers, growers that were coming from the ornamental horticulture industry. And so we have a really great diverse local team. What we're really excited about is focusing on the functional food element of what we're already growing. So we already have the production, we have the space. And, throughout the years, as I'm learning more about what we grow, realizing what microgreens and baby greens are and the health benefits, all the micronutrients, the minerals, the vitamins. Now we realize, and COVID, we do have to credit COVID for this because everyone became a lot more conscious about their health, where the food comes from. And
Yeah,
that has not gone
yeah.
away. If anything, people are more honed in on it. So we have the opportunity now to, bring that to a wider audience beyond just the chefs, beyond just the hospitality industry. And, that came from, you know, listening to some of our customers, and they basically, in a way, guided where we should go and what the demands are going to look like. So now we're focusing on the functional food element of what we grow. We're growing about 60 different crop types at this point. So it's such
Oh,
a
wow.
vast diversity. So there's a diverse nutritional element to all the plants. So we'll be working with universities for that. And, why shouldn't this be part of everyone's daily diet? I started eating more of it ourselves at home, incorporating into our food and realized actually this is a really convenient fresh greens ingredient to add to my normal diet. I'm adding it to my curry, my instant noodles versus, just thinking about it just in a salad or garnish form. We can
Yeah,
actually add it
yeah.
to a lot of the Chinese Asian cuisine as well and, fulfill the greens element to the meal. So we want to bring that functional food element and we want to make it easy and accessible.
So, how have you grown as a CEO since starting? You had a trial by fire to get this off the ground. Obviously, it wasn't easy, a lot of ups and downs along the way. And, it's like you had to learn quickly on the job, right? Or else you wouldn't succeed. So, I know sometimes it's hard to your accomplishments and as an entrepreneur as well. Sometimes I'm just so focused on what to do next. But, when you do pause and look back, you look back at what you've accomplished since starting. How do you think, you would look back and see how you've grown as a leader and a business owner?
Well, I've still got a long way to go, but gotta count some of the wins as well and, the blessings that I've had. One is early days, and one of the things that I had in mind and my goal before I had a team, I think before we were even really a business, was I can't wait to hire the first person because I was doing everything alone and, it was pretty lonely while you're trying to figure it out. And then when you start hiring people, you have to learn how to communicate with the team and, learn quickly how to phase out from it. And I had a lot of great learning from that. And I had to learn quickly because I wasn't great at initially building the team and how to bring people together. And then you know, fundraising, talking to investors, everything had to be learning on the go. You mentioned building the plane while it's ascending. It was more like building the plane while descending, if anything.
That's
Because
true, yeah.
you have the speed of gravity pulling you. So you have gravity pulling you, and so the speed of learning accelerates. I've got a long way to go, but, I think the more I build, the more confidence I get, then the more focus I get and the more excited I get. And the excitement, the momentum, we get to enroll more people to want to be part of this. And the credit goes to the team and goes to our customers, goes to my advisors just for being there. Like on the get-go, I knew this was something I wanted to build that was beyond me. So I knew it was not going to be a one-man band. That means the pie has to be split in terms of hopefully the responsibilities, but also the credit to them as well. And it's an ongoing learning process, but I think one thing for sure is you learn a lot about yourself and what you're capable of, where your weak points are, where you should get better at. And so, yeah, it's great learning. I'm still really enjoying it.
Yeah, sounds like it's definitely be ongoing for you. So, what's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
What's a tough question? Well, I think it relates back to what I just also said, and it's a lot of the internal conversations is because a lot of the building and visualization of the business is internal because sometimes you just don't know what to share sometimes.
Mm,
And so then the question is like, well, how much of the pie am I willing to split? And being able to come to terms with it because it's so personal. I am Common Farms is me for so long, but once you start
yeah,
enrolling more people into it, and which was the goal, then, maybe like mentally just not ready or, letting go of certain things and also even realizing, oh, this is not my responsibility anymore. And one of the ones that hard but also very easy for me to answer was, all right, how much of the company am I willing to give away or
yeah,
for the return of having more people be part of this and for us to be able to do more and do better? It was a very easy answer. It was, I'm willing to give as much as I possibly can for the right people to be part of this, for the right
sure.
partnerships, but also making sure I'm making the right decisions to bring in the right people to be part of it. And sometimes there's a internal conversation like, "Jess, you gotta let go of this part. It's okay," because so much of the beginning was, you're on your own, you're building this, and you cannot rely on anyone else because it's no one else's responsibility. So that was
Yeah.
deep, vulnerable question I had to answer, but yeah, it definitely helped, like, my mental space for where we should go.
Yeah. It's not an easy conversation, and anyone who's had a business or that's growing or is trying to raise some money, those are tough conversations to have because it's at the end of the day, it's your baby. It's something that you started, that will forever be connected to you, and to make tough decisions about how much of it to part with, who to trust. And it does get lonely. And I definitely can relate to that aspect of it because at some point, you don't know who you can talk to about what's going on in your head. And so it's important to have advisors or people that you trust or people that you can bounce ideas off. Because if not,
Mhm.
just even speaking from experience, if it stays in your head too much, it's you start to like feel like you're talking to yourself.
Yeah, and I make wrong decisions because I make certain assumptions, or I delay
Mm,
things in doing because I'm running this conversation that makes absolutely no sense in my head, but it makes sense in my head. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a real learning for me.
yeah. So, you had the experience of connecting with others in the indoor farming space from your time in Chicago. I like to leave a little time towards the end of these conversations to foster like this sense of collaboration, conversation about what's happening in the space. So, is there anything that comes to mind for you as you think about maybe your peers or your colleagues in the indoor farming space? Anything that you think would might help in terms of collaboration or just communicating more, working together as an industry?
Well, I think we're still in early stage, we're still building. It's not easy because we're always just focused on what we're doing, and every market is very different. You know, it makes a lot of sense to do, large scale greenhouses or, smaller individual vertical farms locally in the US, whereas in Asia, we have a different model. But, we can't do this alone. So, we really welcome anyone that's developing anything to, reach out to us. We're constantly in the experimental stage, which means like because we're always incrementally making improvements. And so we can't figure all of this out on our own. But one thing that we're very focused on is looking at the nutritional value in our produce. And, that goes international for everyone that's growing fresh produce for the local community. So I think if we could be able to come together, with whatever research and not feel like we're competing with each other, but be able to just share and be able to produce in a bigger way of better quality food and freshness, and the time you harvest to the time you consume is very critical. And, the shorter the time, the better without all the constant fluctuation of temperature and climate. So I love to, connect with people that are doing something interesting and, that's really focused on the nutritional value or how we can increase the nutritional value of the produce and, how we can bring it more to the market.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach, and it's probably something that folks that are listening or watching are thinking about as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it's going to be something that's helpful for everyone in this industry, especially as we're communicating to the consumers. It's because a lot of times they may just be looking at the price and not be considering the benefits. And I think there's a lot of education, like even in the States here, what used to be considered local, you could actually come from 400 miles away. So now we have to use the term hyper local because it's like that's a big difference because it's like you said, 15 minutes away, which is but it gets education because if people don't know, it's how the farm to table movement started here as well. 'Cause people started to
Mhm.
pay more attention to where food is coming from and how long it takes. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing, a very inspiring story full of a lot of ups and downs. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more. So there'll probably be a follow-up conversation at some point to see where
I
you're
love
at. But let's follow the journey. So website is commonfarms.com. Anywhere else you want to send the folks to connect with you or learn more?
Yeah, so, all our social media is at Common Farms, and then, reach out to me on link my name is Jessica Naomi Fong. Also, I think That's the name for all my social media as well. And
Okay.
yeah, I love to connect with more people. I think we have the real opportunity to build something meaningful. So, and none of us can do it alone. So, and
Yeah.
credit to you for, putting this podcast together and, sticking with it for having it 4 years now, I believe, or is
4
that
years,
long?
yeah.
Years.
4
And truth be told, some of those lonely nights in the farm where I'm just sowing trays or harvesting, I do listen to your podcast. And, these conversations do keep some of us going, in the low times, like just not feeling alone. So thanks to you.
Well, that's important. Yeah, and it's the nature of podcasting that you can do it almost anywhere, and especially if, you're doing it somewhere where you can have something on in the background, and I don't know if I thought about that when I started, but a lot of farmer it's helpful for a lot of farmers, especially who have, like you said, long days or maybe
Yeah.
long nights, so I appreciate that feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, appreciate it.